Okay, hello, welcome friends. Welcome to week one, lecture 2, and February 8th, 2023. I believe that's the date. Yes, it is. We have got discussion questions due at 11:59 p.m. PST this Sunday night. I'm going to do this every single day. So just please know that that is the case. Want to make sure, yes, they are open. Thank you for those that have messaged me a couple times. That was really kind of you. You guys are really honorable. But yes, they are basically all open. So, do with that what you will. Make sure that that is not a thing that pushes you from actually continuing forward. Cool. I forgot to fill this out, but your core assignments, you've got 3 of them. So please make sure you've got that all filled out. I showed that yesterday. I sent that email. So you should know what your core assignments are, but please make sure you do those. That way, you're staying on top of everything. And then the last thing, yes, was Gray's Hour. We're going to continue through, or Gray is going to bring up something every Thursday and just sort of walk through similar how we did today. So that way you guys can just gain understandings and things either that you're really interested in or things that we think might help. I know Gray's really excited about using Mongo Atlas. So when we're dealing with MongoDB, Mongo Atlas is a tool that Gray is going to teach you how to be a wizard at. So that is going to be really, really awesome. If you were unable to make it to the office hour, we talked about basically how to use your terminal, a little bit of tips and tricks on creating these things called aliases and functions to make your life just really more efficient. And then we also talked about GitHub just on a very, very small level. We'll walk through it again at the end of class today. So that way you can push all of your code to GitHub. My encouragement to you, especially if this is your last stack, if this is your first stack, it doesn't matter. Last stack before P&A is start pushing everything you have to GitHub. It sounds stupid, and it is stupid in my opinion, but a lot of recruiters who don't know anything about tech, but just know that you're a dev and they look for certain things is on GitHub on your profile, they'll have these little green squares. And again, it's not a real indicator of your coding abilities, but developers love to see green squares. So might as well play into that and just sort of know your audience. So start pushing everything you do to GitHub, and I promise it'll pay off for you. And you'll just start getting, used to using GitHub and used to handling things like that. Cool. Any questions on housekeeping before we sort of jump in? Got a little bit bigger day. Cool. Great. So we have a couple things that we want to talk about from yesterday. Also, just wanted to note that I know that there's currently some issues with the platform. I was able to get in. I can give you a link. If you go to, I'll put a link in the chat right now. I'm not sure exactly what is putting it down, but there's a link in the chat right now to basically, if you just go to .com/courses, that'll open it up for you. But if you just try to go through the dashboard, it's not going to work. So if you are having issues, we're aware of it. Our dev team's aware of it. And we have put in a note for that. Cool. So far we've talked about some of the stuff. Now, this is what we're going to go over today. We're not going to really talk about ternary operators. Again, that could be something that we can talk about tomorrow because I think ternary operators are kind of dope. But we're going to talk about destructuring rest/spread. We're going to talk about arrow functions today. And then we're going to actually jump into our first sort of beginning of React. Now, one thing I want to note is if you are dealing with React, if you've gotten this far, this part, in my opinion, is very confusing. This what is React, using React, and first React are kind of challenging. And not that I don't love a challenge, but part of it is it's not something we're ever going to deal with. It's kind of like knowing how, I don't even know, like not even how an engine works, because that's not even true. It's like knowing how to, I can't even have a good analogy, but it's knowing stuff you don't need to know because you're never going to use it again in your life, right? It's like knowing how to do long division when you just use a calculator. I guess that'd be my thing. So if this is stumping you, please don't worry about it. This first React might be a little bit of a challenge, but really you can kind of skip this stuff and go straight to syntactic sugar, because this is what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about Babel. We're going to talk about JSX, how that works. We're going to talk maybe a little bit about the DOM, and then we're going to create our first React app and just look at what was created. What are the tools that we have? at our access. Now, tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to really start diving in and creating components. And then we'll talk about props as well. So you will have everything that you need to really get started. So we will make sure that, again, tomorrow we're going to create components. We're going to talk about props. And we're going to really start seeing how this is working. So if this part did confuse you, I just wanted to bring it up. If that did confuse you, the first part of React, please don't feel bad. That is, in my opinion, I don't love that we even have that section because it doesn't make sense for what we're doing. Great. Cool. So let's just jump in. There's two things we need to talk about, and there's normal functions, and these are going to go to arrow functions. And then we're going to talk about destructuring. Now, I have quite a bit of code here, so we're going to kind of unpack it as we go. But here's sort of what we call our ES5 function. And this is what you're probably used to, right? Especially if you're coming from WebFund, or really if you went to Python or even Java. Writing a function, though they look different, right? Because Java, you have to declare like what's going to be returned, and Python is just like super chill. They just say like def, and then you write it. Here, what you're doing is you're doing a function declaration, your function name with your parentheses. And if you have anything you need to pass in there, you would put some sort of variable, right? Or some sort of parameter / argument of what needs to be passed through. And then, well, what does the function do? And these two guys right here, these curly brackets are what of our block scope. So if you are on the platform and you look through, I think there's a section that talks about scope. Yeah. And we're dealing with sort of block scope, and that's really the in-depth of let, var, and const, and just understanding how let and var operate differently. You can think of var really as sort of this global variable, and let is just assigned to whatever is within its scope. And then if it leaves that, then it doesn't exist. Maybe we can talk about that tomorrow in a little bit more in depth. But that is really the basis of these functions. And these work just fine, right? Like, this is not a bad way to do it. There is just other ways to do it. And so introducing, so here's our first function. And then now we're introducing the same thing, the same sort of function, but we're writing it as an arrow function. And so here, instead of, there's a few things that are happening. Instead of just saying function, say hello, what we actually do is create a variable. Now this is going to be a constant variable, right? And we're going to say this is what our name is, and these are always constant variables. Then we say equals, and what this does is we put our parentheses and an arrow, hence the name arrow function. What this is doing is this is telling our system, our program, okay, I'm creating this variable, but this variable is a function. Then what I'm doing is I'm saying console.log. Again, within this, it looks the exact same, right? I'm doing console.log. And then I tell it what I'm doing, and then I just run console log. So the setup is different, but what's happening on the inside is exact same. Now, there's a few ways or a few reasons why we do this. A, syntactically, it sort of looks better and operates better, and it's the ES6, I believe. So it's sort of like the new shiny thing. Let me go ahead and console this. But it actually does have some benefits. There's really sort of three main ones, but it has some benefits on what we can do in just making your code look nicer. Unfortunately, unless you're dealing with kind of a nuancy portion, it's more of allowing our code to look a certain way or have these values in this, and sort of instead of having to create a variable that is set to a function, we can just sort of do it this way. It's just a quicker way to do it. But what we can do is with arrow functions, and when we're dealing with returns, it will automatically, if we have just one thing, it'll automatically return that. It's called an implicit return. So instead of having to do something like this, where I say const hello arrow, create my arrow function, and then say return hello world, when I have something like that, I can actually just say this. I can say const say hello arrow return implicit, right? I pass in my parentheses, and then it right here, if I just have one thing, right, it will automatically return this. So I actually don't have to use the return word. It'll automatically return this. Now, let's say that I had a variable right? And I had a function that I wanted to be able to pass in a value. In this case, we're going to call it name. And I wanted it to return hello, whatever this name is. Well, again, it has implicit return, right? Because that's what we're setting this equal to. So it returns whatever this value is, and that is what is equal to it. And so here I just say name. I have one value, and then I say hello name. Again, very similar to what we've already done, or just what a normal function will look like. The other difference is when I just have one value, I actually don't even need these parentheses. I can just do this. And this will do the same thing. If I'm just passing one value, I don't even need the parentheses. Now, if I pass multiple, I do. But if I'm just passing one value with these arrow functions, you might just see something like this. And it's doing the same thing. It is implied that this is the parameter and the value going into it. And so then it's just sort of less coding as well. And lastly, what you can do and with any function is you can create defaults, right? So let's say that you wanted to create a function that said hello name, but sometimes people were going to add in a name or sometimes they didn't. Well, if they don't, what do you want it to default to? In this case, all we have to do is say name equals John in our parentheses. And if I run this and I don't pass anything, it will say, let's run it. It'll say, hello, John. But if I run this and I say, Gray, it'll say, hello, Gray, right? That's the idea behind a default parameter. Here's my parameter. If something's passed in, go ahead and use that. If nothing's passed in, go ahead and use this. The real power is this guy right here, is these two things, is it's implicit return. That's really sort of the big value in if you were to Google or ask ChatGPT, what's the big difference? It really is that implicit return. And then being able to write it all on one line and not having to use parentheses. Now that sounds silly. Like, why would we learn that? And I understand that. Part of it is this is sort of the standard. And when we're dealing with React, you want to do some of the sort of the same things. Like instead of using snake case, we use camel case, or we use called kebab case. Either one of those. We'll talk about kebab case today. Doesn't matter which one you do. They both do the same thing, right? If you use kebab case or snake case or camel case, they all sort of do the same thing. But because everybody in React writes with kebab case, or if you're writing in JavaScript and you write with like camel case, that also works too. So those are really the big things. The last one is when you are dealing with sort of this keyword. That's really sort of the power of arrow functions. It's beyond the scope of anything we're going to do. But I would get used to using arrow functions because they are sort of, again, syntactically how React is operated and run. And then if we want to do anything with this value, this actual function itself, we can. And so that'll be really powerful. And it might seem right now kind of dumb, if I'm being blatantly honest. Like, well, why would JavaScript do this? As we go through and as we are actually building right now, it might seem sort of muddled and doesn't make sense. But as we go through and we are building more and more and more in React, you'll start being much more comfortable with it. And then B, you'll start understanding, okay, this is why, and this is how, and this is sort of the reasoning for this setup. Any questions on that?
Quick question. Would you mind just like maybe rewriting that function that you were just on the old way, just to like have another example of what it would have looked like until we did what we did?
Yeah, so I'm gonna say I always spell function wrong, so that's also why I love these, because I don't have to write function. I literally will always spell function wrong. So if I wanted to, here it is. Function, say hello old way, right? That you're going to take in a name. Sorry, I forgot to turn off GitHub Copilot. And then if I wanted to, here, again, remember this is an implied return. So if I was going to do it this old way, I would just say return with hello name. And then if I wanted to, I would just console.log. Say hello old way John, and I'd have to call that function. And then if I do that, this will print for me. Hello John.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Somebody said Copilot is so cool. Yes, it is. It is dope. Any other questions? Does that make sense? Again, as we go through this, it sort of feels weird to use arrow functions. I am with you. But as you go through and you start seeing, and really the power is when we're dealing with event listeners and when we're changing things, it's just very simple to run through those different values and create those functions, and much easier sort of to handle event handlers and everything like that. But that'll be as we go here. But it's just really simply taking the values that we have and just changing it to this more syntactically viewed way. Just put a 1 in the chat if this is all making perfect sense, or put a 0 if you are so lost and somewhere in between. For anybody less than like a 0.7, Gray, can you reach out?
Will do.
Thank you. Cool. Now, moving forward, we're going to talk about destructuring. So sometimes, and this is, I know I keep saying this, and this is hard, but destructuring might not make sense at the beginning, but this is going to be a huge thing in React, and you're just going to have more and more practice with this. So let's say we have an object here. Actually, let's start with an array. So here I've got an array of to-dos, right? I'm going to cancel this out. Cool. I've got an array of to-do right here, and it is just an array of objects, right, that have an ID of a text and completed with a Boolean, right? Now, what I can do is I can actually destructure these and say to do 2, to do 3. And if I were to print these, let's show this. I have these now individual objects. They're no longer in a list. I am taking them out of the list format, and I'm creating an individual object. And so to do, when I do const just like this, when I'm dealing with a array, when I say to do, what this is doing is this is taking this first value in my array before the first comma, right? It's taking whatever that value is and setting this name equal to it. Now, let's say I didn't want to have that. If I didn't care about the first one, I just care about the last two. What I could actually do is this. I could just do a comma. And then what that will do is it will skip over the first one. And then this one right here will just be the second one. So now if I run this, I should see just ID 2 and ID 3. What this is really doing under the hood, and why this is really important, is because now it allows us to keep what we want. And then we'll be able to, and when we get into React, we're going to be able to manipulate pieces and then put it all back together. And that is really the power there, is we're going to be able to take stuff out. And there's this thing called the spread/rest operator that we'll talk about here towards the end of this portion, and then we'll get on to React. But it allows us to take this, spread it out, and maybe say, I want everything except this, and then I can alter this guy and put it back together. Now, one thing to note is this is not, this guy right here is not deleting this. It's not rewriting this. It is making a copy of this. And so what is really important is when we get into React and we get into this thing called state, we'll want to get some information, we'll want to alter it, and then we can push it back and update the what we call state to update the values there. We can, I think I had was there a question? Ethan, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah. So when you're like not reassigning, like copying that like to do 2 and 3 to equal to do's, how come instead you're like console logging like 2 and 3 instead of just like to do's? Would that log the first like variable up top?
Yeah,
under-
great question. Really, really, really great question. So let's walk through that. What Ethan's asking is, this doesn't make sense. I didn't go over this. You're right. Here I'm saying to-dos equals to-dos. And that is sort of a confusing, well, it seems like we're creating these variables and their values are equal to this list right here. What is actually happening when we're destructuring and what JavaScript knows is when we do this and we set it equal to this array right here. Again, it's not deleting anything from the array. What this is doing is this is going into my array and it's taking not the first, but the second and the third value and setting those values independently to these new variables. So what it's doing is actually creating a new variable of to do 2, and its value is whatever is at the second position or index of 1 in my to-dos array. Like if I were to say console.log to-dos, I will still have this list or this array available to me. It doesn't change my initial array. It just picks out what I need from that array and I can do and manipulate anything I want with it. So what this is doing is this is destructuring. It's taking from this array and based off of what I do here, based off my commas, or if I do the spread or rest operator, this will get those values and set it to do something, set these values or this variable to whatever position is within this array in this array right here. Somebody asked if we take to do 3, will we have 2 commas before? Yeah. So if I just wanted to do 3, I would just do this. And then I would get rid of this. And this will still stay the same. And if I run this, it should just get the last one. So now, oh, let's see what happened here. So we have 1 comma, 2 comma, to do 3. Oops. Yeah, there we go. I'm not sure what happened there. But I just got the last one based off the position that we had. Somebody asked, for this guy, can you name it whatever you want? You absolutely can. You can write unicorn right here. Does not matter. And I just write unicorn. It's just a new variable. We will get the exact same value. Yeah, great point out. You can name those anything you want. Cool. Now we can do the same thing with objects. So let me comment these out. So we can actually do the same thing with objects. I've got this object of profile here with a key of name, key of address. This address, its value is an actual object as well of street, city, and then a list of hobbies here. Now, one thing to note that is different when destructuring an object than an array, and it makes sense, right? Uses the square brackets that says, hey, we're destructuring this array. I pass it an array to destructure. The thing, and it again makes sense, is that for an object, we use curly brackets. So anytime we're destructuring, we are wanting to use curly brackets. So here, when I say, let's go ahead and log this out real fast. When I say this, and I run this, I get John Doe, street, and movies. John Doe Street and movies, right? I get the different keys that I had. Now notice that when I'm dealing with an object and this value here is another object, right? I can actually even destructure those and say, okay, well, I want the street and the city. I want those individual, but instead of passing the object, I pass the object dot key. This is where the dot notation really comes in handy, right? I do the object and then the object's key that contains those values. And so now if I were to run this, let's clear this. Now if I were to run it, not only do I get John Doe, the street, 40 Main, Boston, movie, city, but I also get 40 Main Street and then Boston. So let's say somebody moved, right? And I'm dealing with this. Instead of me going in and sort of trying to change this, I could destructure it, or I could take those values. If I wanted to do something and send somebody a package and I had an API maybe that needs the address in the street, I could destructure that information, have it, and then send it to some sort of like shipping label, if you will, and pass that through. All we're doing, all you can think about destructuring, and again, as we're in React and as we get through React, you're going to really realize the power in what we're doing, especially when we get to like use state and use effect. But what we're doing is we're taking something and we're just taking a piece of that and then saying, okay, I want a copy of that so I can do something with it. But remember, our object itself doesn't change. It's just making a copy of whatever is within our object or our array, if that's what we're dealing with. Now you can also do it with a function as well. You can destructure a function. You probably won't have to do that in this class, but just wanted you to know that it is an option. You can destructure a function if you needed to. Operates the exact same way. In this case, with ID, name, and address, it's because this is returning a list, or sorry, an array. And so we do it here. Right? Because this function is returning an array, here's why we have square brackets. If it was returning an object, we'd obviously do the object. And then you, for a function, the only thing that's different is instead of setting it equal to the object, right here, object or the list array. I'm so sorry, I keep calling it a list. Instead of doing that, we just set it to our function and we actually run the function when we do that. We run the function, we get the values, we destructure them, save them and copy them as the ID, name, and address. Again, these can be anything you want to name it. And then we can console log if we wanted. Now, let's say I wanted to keep the, I guess real quick, I'll stop there. Any questions on that? Somebody, there are quite a few questions, so I'll get started. If I wanted the first one, what I need commas after. So that's actually, Jacob, what we're talking about. Let's say if you just wanted the first one, no, you would just put, if we wanted just this guy, let's go back to this guy. If I just wanted the first to do, then all you would have to do is write, oops, unicorn. No commas. You don't have to put anything after either. And then this will get you, I don't want the first part. And this will just get you the first one. Great question. So if you just want the first one, you don't need any commas after. But if you do want, any other ones, then that's where the commas come in. Great question, Jacob. If I have 5 to-dos and I want to call 4, we'll need three commas in front. Yep. You can, there's other, sort of quicker ways to do it as well. And then we have our spread / rest operator that can kind of get you, you can sort of start manipulating on what you want. I believe if you did want number 4, you would do, I don't believe the spread operator does sort of the alterations. You're going to have to mess with that a little bit. But let's say that I did want sort of like the first one and I wanted the rest of them, right? So I want the name, but I still want access to the rest of that information. This is where the spread operator comes in, or rest. And so what this does is we still have our object here, but our object is still this profile. And then what we are doing is we are destructuring it. Again, we're saying name, that is that that key right there. And if I say this dot rest, let's see what it does. If I come here and I run this, we can see that it says John Doe. And then what it does is it actually creates the rest of the values as an object. And so it'll save sort of the rest of the values as an object. So I'm sort of decoupling the name in this regard, where rest just equals everything except the name. I can do that with an array as well. If I were to do the same thing, let's say I just wanted the first one, but I wanted to keep access. I wanted to have access to the rest of the values. I could just use this dot rest. And what it would actually give me is an array of all the values that I had left. But what I could say is name, and then I could say, let's say age 30. Perfect. What I could also say is name and then address, comma, rest. And what this will do is still give me name, the address, and then you can see that as an outside object, I still have the remaining pieces. So this rest value is just whatever remains. So give me the rest of that. And this goes into depth, rest and spread right here. So you can deal with objects and how that operates. If you wanted the entire person, if you just wanted a copy of that, you could just use this. If you just do the dot, 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 and if you just use dot, 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 and then a value, a variable, then it's going to get you just a copy of whatever you had. And then you can check and see, like, there's some certain things that you can do with that. But it is reserved for sort of like the rest of these values. Somebody asked, is rest a reserved word in that context? Nope. You could use anything. So here is attributes. It's just sort of like, oh, this is the rest, but you can do whatever you needed with it. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Any questions on sort of destructuring the rest / spread operator? Again, that's something that as we are using like use effect and use state, that's really what we're going to deal with. And so you'll get tons of practice on this. I promise that. But any questions on this? How are we feeling? Can you just put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense? You guys are pretty
I don't know
quiet.
if it would be a practical thing to do, but could you do like dot, dot, dot rest for some amount of values and then grab something and then dot, dot, dot rest again? Or would that be
I don't believe
not
you
the right-
can, because I believe that dot, dot, dot rest gets you the remaining. And so it doesn't have a stopping point. And so it'll get you sort of, I don't believe that you can do that. What you would want to do in all actuality is you would want to either grab the value, like if you were looking for something specific, you would just grab that value and then say dot, dot, dot rest, or you would approach it in a different way, but you wouldn't do dot, dot, dot rest, comma, 3, comma, or, name, comma, dot, dot, dot rest. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you could split it. I mean, there's other built-in things that you could do, like other built-in values within the class of array and the class of object that could get you that information in a more efficient way for sure.
Sorry, I have a quick question about rest. Does the information that you like put into that like rest or whatever, does that save, or is it just to view it like strictly?
Nope, it saves it. So remember, it's a copy, right? So it's a copy of this. Any of these are just copies. And now I have a variable. You can really think of this as just me creating a bunch of variables and their values. This variable's value is John Doe. If I were to call name anywhere, now I have that access to John Doe. If I were to call address anywhere, I'd have access to this guy right here. And then if I were, I guess technically this whole thing, sorry. And if I were to call rest anywhere, just like this, it's just a value here. So yeah, it saves that value, and you can now do anything you want. If you wanted to push to this array right here and add it in, you could do that. Like it's just a copy of this original.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Great questions, guys. Any other questions? I might go over just a little bit today, just a heads up. Cool.
If anyone has questions, and if you don't feel comfortable, like posting in a chat, DM me.
Mhm.
And I can always answer you privately, whether in the Discord or here in the chat here, or just after, just let me know, and then, so we can, assist. Just saying that for those, because I only saw like 20 people answer, and it's about 37 people here.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that those folks are like, oh, I don't want to say anything. So please reach out if you are struggling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is hopefully a space that you guys can feel comfortable to ask questions, but I totally get it too. And also all this code will be available to you on GitHub. So if you wanted to look at this again, please feel free. Cool. Any other questions real quickly before we jump into our next? I might go over by about 5 to 10 minutes. I try not to. We'll see how quickly we can go through this, but I don't want to like give you less information, if that makes sense. But today's pretty easy. We're just jumping into React. So we might be A-okay. Any other quick questions before I sort of move on from yesterday? Cool. All right. Well, now we are jumping into really the meat and potatoes of this. This is going to be really kind of the most important, not really the most important, but this is going to be a huge piece of what you're learning. And really for the job market, this will be probably one of the more important things that you learn. Just as an understanding, React is a JavaScript library. Now you might hear framework and you might hear library, and what's the difference? There are some differences. Library is just basically a bunch of code somebody else has written that you can call and it does things. And you don't have to write the code for it to do things. You just call the code that's already been written. You can think of it like console.log, right? Console.log, I did not write the functionality for something to be passed through and then it print it to me, right? I didn't have to write that. That is just a function that is built into JavaScript. Same thing is with a library, right? Bootstrap's a very good example of that. There's a lot of CSS already built, and then you can just use that whenever you want to use that. React is a library, a framework more so. Like, what's the difference? A framework dictates how things operate and how you have to sort of move through things. A library just is a plethora of tools that you have access to. So it doesn't dictate how you set up your code, but it's something you can build within your code. So that's what React is it's a library. And it's the most popular library. Other popular ones right now are Angular, but that's sort of kind of on the decline. Vue.js is another really, really popular one. And then there's one that starts with an S that I've heard a couple times, but really it's Angular, Vue, and React are sort of the main ones, where React is by far the king. Everybody's currently using React. You might ask, well, where did it come from? React was created by Facebook. 2011, they realized, hey, there's different things we need that there isn't a language that has that. So it created its own, which is pretty elite. Actually, a lot of the languages are just, companies creating code and then all of a sudden it becomes a language. But it comes from that, and it has been so popular ever since. It is by far the most used front end language library that is out there. There's tons of jobs in React. Most people want you to learn React. React has gotten into React Native, which is how you can do mobile applications. So it's really, really a powerful tool to know. And the big thing about it is that it is a single page application. So what does that mean? What that means is, normally, if you guys have done anything, whether it was through, if you come from Web Fund, then maybe you haven't had routing stuff. But if you're coming from Python or Java, then you understand that you have this page, right? And if we are doing anything, let's say we have a form within this page and we wanted to submit a form and then we want to show the dashboard. Well, what would happen is I have this page, my user submits some information, it goes to my backend, right? I would save that information at some sort of database. I would have some sort of routing issue, or not issue, but I'd have some sort of routing something. And then what it would do is it would actually send a new page over. And so now I'm going to delete this guy, because now we have a new page that is now showing whatever we want to show. It could be showing the same exact thing as the original page, but now it is a call to a new page. And so what happens is my front end has to re-download all this information, all of the beginning pieces of your HTML, your doc type, you are really changing and having a brand new page. So your code is constantly running, getting things from your server, right? Or your, your database / servers in here as well. So it's getting things. Oh, actually, probably more so like this. You have your backend that then calls to a database. And then you're getting a new page every single time. And that is okay. I mean, people operate that way, and tons of programs operate that way. But what Facebook decided was, well, this isn't that great of a user experience. What they said was, man, right now we're getting every single aspect of our page. So if I've got a nav bar, I'm having to re-download that. Let's say, and again, we're thinking of Facebook, you have a whole bunch of stuff on this side. I have to re-download that. Then I have my actual like user dashboard, and they have like, okay, let's write a post. Cool. I've got to re-download that. And then lastly, here's like their where you scroll, right, to see all those people's things. What they said was, what if I clicked on a page, and instead of me having to re-download the nav bar and this other nav bar on the left and write a post, what if they just wanted to replace that? What if instead I could keep, let's say we wanted to get, we wanted to go from writing a post to viewing somebody's post, is we could take these components away. We're going to keep this page, and we could just actually, let's pretend that, this component lived over here. I said, well, what if we just grabbed it and changed the view? All we're doing is swapping these out, and we don't have to change the nav bars. We don't have to change some of these static things that are going to be persistent throughout every class or throughout every sort of interaction with the website. So now instead of going from page to page, you're just swapping out components. And that's what we call a single page application. And that's really the power behind React, and why it is so popular, is it can create a better user experience. Now on the front side is it sort of downloads every single option of what you need, right? You need every single component, so it'll have that available. And so what it's doing is, instead of constantly calling our server, instead of constantly calling our backend, now what it can do is it can just replace the components as it needs. And that makes for a much faster experience for our user, more seamless experience for our user. A great example would be, if we're thinking about, again, Facebook. I use them a ton in this class. We're thinking about Facebook. Let's say I write a comment, right? So like, let's say, let's go back to, oops. Yeah, let's do this. Let's say I write a comment. Here's where I can write a message, and then here's my page here. And somebody posts something, and I want to write a comment. So here's the post. Oh my goodness. You think it's my first time? Here's the post, and then I want to write a comment. Well, instead of having to re-download everything, what we can do is just swap it out or add to the components that currently are there. And then now all the thing that is changed is we've just changed this one piece. We've either swapped out or added to our components, but we don't have to change the entire page, go get it from our server or our backend, and then understand and get the information. We don't have to do that. So it makes it really fast, instead of having to distribute all the same information. Because the only thing that really changed here was I added a comment, right? That's the only thing that changed. Even the post itself stayed the same. So that's really the power behind a single page application. Does that make sense? Are there any questions? Somebody said, so do you do that by keeping things hidden until needed, like div containing things? Not necessarily hidden, but we can update state, and that's really sort of update the values. So there will be a comments section. There just might not be any comments. And then if there are, similar to how we did in WebFund, where you would target an element and then you sort of change the values, it from a very sort of low perspective, that's how it operates, right? It just is changing that one component. It's not changing everything else. It's just editing that one component. So somebody asks, could that potentially slow down things enough, or with enough content, since it's still accessible, just not visible? Not necessarily, because you're just swapping it out instead of having to go call a server and then re-render everything. You're just swapping out components, and that time, the time it takes to swap out a component is faster than the time it would take to go to a server and then bring it back. A great question. Great questions. Any other questions on single page application and sort of how that works? It also creates this thing called a virtual DOM. So if you remember the DOM, if you remember the DOM from Web Fundamentals, what a single page application does, and this is sort of probably too high of a level, but I like to give you guys as much information as possible, is it creates a copy of that. And then what it will do is it will constantly compare, okay, my copy and then what is currently happening. And then if there's any changes, it's like constantly listening. It just goes and updates that element. That's sort of how it works. And so that is sort of the robustness, right? Is it always is comparing and saying, oh, this is different. They've added a comment here. Okay, we need to combine those to make sure that everything is up to date. And so that's how React works. And that's how just single page application works. There are other single page application libraries and tools. React is just the most popular, but from a very high level, that's how they work. Somebody asked, so is state in JS basically like session in Java? For example, if you were keeping a logged in user in Java, would you just keep them in state? Yeah, that's a great, you would actually use it. It's a little bit different, Chris, but I love the sort of analogy. State is going to be something, if we want to keep a temporary value, we'll absolutely do. It's a little bit more challenging here, and you actually don't, for the belt exam, have to do a login and registration because it's pretty difficult. If you wanted to do session like you do in Java or Python, you would actually use something called a JSON Web Token or JWT. And that is what's going to be, and that's actually, we'll do that in week 7 or 8. We'll build a login and reg. That way you can see it, because that is how it's done in the real world. Most of the time, you're not going to use session. You're going to use some sort of cookie, or you're going to use like a JWT or web token or something to keep track of that. But yeah, same sort of bot. Great job, Chris. Great question. Somebody asked, does single page application mean all these sections are created in one JS page or multiple JSs? I'm so glad you asked, because that is what we're going to do next. Like I said, we might go over maybe 5, maybe 10 minutes at the max, but we should be pretty okay. There's a couple things you will need. We're actually going to create our first React application right now, but just things to note is there is this thing called Chrome React Developer Tools. I will put in Discord. There's also Firefox and Edge. If you'd use those, there are some React Developer Tools. What this will do is when you're doing inspect, it'll give us actually more availability to understanding our components when we get into React. And so this doesn't come out of the box, so you do have to download it as an extension. So I'll make sure I put those links here in Discord after class tonight. And then secondly, as always, you do need to have Node. And a big portion of that is whenever you download Node, you have something called the Node Package Manager, NPM, and you're going to do so many things with that. It's very much so like pip when you are dealing with Python. So it's just your package manager. There's going to be tons of packages that we're using. So you need to make sure you have Node, or else this is not going to work. Cool. So let's create our first React app, and we can ask that question of what are we doing with multiple JSs? Or we'll begin to answer that. So I'm going to navigate. Let me pull this. So if you guys were here, you guys know what I'm doing. We're doing CD, and then we're going desktop, instruction. Oh, nope. Dojo instruction, Feb 2-3. Can't remember. Oh, yeah. CD week 1. Oh, goodness. CD week 1. Lecture 2. Cool. So I have navigated. If you guys don't know what I just did and that looked foreign, please go watch the office hour, because we talked all about what CDing is and navigating. So I've navigated here to my folder that I want my React app in, and this is lecture 2. Now, the way I create this, and it's going to take a little bit, so I'm going to say it and then I'll explain it, is you say npx. Npx is just how we do it. It is still part of npm. Why it's npx, I don't really know. But you say npx, you say create React app. And I'm going to say first React, and you put it in kebab case. So If you have a dash here, so that is called kebab case, or it's also called, I think it's called Lisp case, which I think is kind of funny, but normally known as kebab case. So I write npx create React app, and then if I say, and then you put your React app name and you run this. It's going to take a while, and we'll see why here in a second, because it's downloading a ton of things and it's creating a ton of things. But once we have this, we'll have our first ever React app, and we can view it and see it and see what it looks like. And then what we'll do with our remaining time is sort of walk through sort of from a high level, what is coming in here, and answer the question of what is actually, how does this work? But now you can see this is done. If you see happy hacking, then that tells me that it is good to go. And it also says that if you want to run this, which we'll go ahead and run, is first I need to CD into my application. If I were to do npm start now, it's not going to work. So I first CD into first React, and then I say npm start. Cool. And it'll automatically open up this window for me, and it's at localhost 3000. Now that's something that's important. This is what we're going to call our client server, and that's going to be at localhost 3000. Now we can change the port if we wanted to, but there's no really need to. And this is automatically what comes up is you have this cool spinning React. This is the React symbol. You've got learn React. This will take us to their documentation, which I encourage you, read documentation. It's dope. And it will help you in a lot of things, how to do a simple component. Again, we're going to help you a lot there, but this is our first application. Not much to look at, but what I want to show is the code. Now, by doing npx create React app, it added this entire application here. There's a few things that I want to go through with this next, maybe I'm going to go 5 minutes over if that's okay. First thing is these node modules. Now, these are tons of different packages, and similar to what I was talking about, this is being able to download and have access to everything that we need, right? Every sort of aspect or every sort of tool in this library is through this node modules. And that is a big package. Now, gratefully and thankfully, whatever we are dealing with this, and just something to note, if you're ever dealing with React and you don't do create React app, or git ignore is not created for you, please make sure you do that. What a git ignore does is whenever we post to GitHub, which I'll do here at the end of class, just so I can show you guys. When we post to GitHub, if we say a git ignore, what it does is actually ignores all of this information and doesn't post it to GitHub. That's important because this is a huge file. And so if we try to put this to GitHub, you might get the error that says, hey, this is way too big. You're not gonna be able to post this. This is too much information. And it's because people that are going to use our code, if they want to use our code, don't actually need it. And here's why, is because it also creates this package lock JSON and this package JSON. And it says basically, here's what you need. Here's all the things that are downloaded for this React app. Now, if somebody were going to take our code and they don't have node modules, all they have to do is navigate here and say npm I. So npm node package manager I, and that'll install everything that's within these package and package lock. They'll install everything that we show, hey, this is what you need for our project. And this will grow as we add in more things. We add this git ignore. It has a README. That's just sort of a basic README. And then there's a few things that are going on here. I'm not going to talk about public yet. We'll talk about source. So here's really where we're going to live. We've got our very basic app CSS. This is just your CSS for what we call our app. Now, this is really what we are seeing right now. So whenever I'm going to do this. Whenever we have this, let me pull this side by side. What we're seeing is we've got a class name, app link, great reference. It says learn React. If I say don't learn React and I save it, you can see it automatically is running and doing my saves. So you see it right here. So this is the view that we're seeing. And this is our first component, right? This is our first piece of what we are using with React. And this is our main area where we're going to put things. in regards of this is what we're using and injecting into our HTML. What do I mean by that? Well, here I've got this index. I'm going to get rid of this so I have full view again. Sorry. Cool. So right here, I've got this index.js. Now, what this file is doing is very similar to that portion of the platform that I told you to skip. Is it's doing exactly that. It's creating this root value, this variable, and it's doing react dom.create root document get element by ID root. And it's doing this react.strict mode. Now, what this is doing is this is what is giving us our errors. No, it will absolutely say do not do strict mode in if you're going into production, but it's idea for development, right? Is when you're developing and you're wanting to know some of these errors, that'll do that for you. So that's what this strict mode is doing. But then what it's saying is, hey, where this root is, let's get the element by ID and I want to render app. So this is the file that's being rendered. Where is that being rendered, you might ask? Well, that's in this index.html. Now, the nice thing is we don't have to deal with index.html. We'll never touch this. But this is the actual HTML that is being read the very first time, right? This is the only HTML that's being read because it's a single page application. The only thing that's being changed is right here with this div ID root div. We are injecting into that this value via this guy right here, right? We're saying render where that div is. Let's go ahead and render this component of app. And so here I can change all of this. Like I can get rid of this and then say H1 and say hello world. Save this. And if I were to go, it's wrong one. There we go. Now I can change this, right? Because that's what's being rendered. We'll talk about, we're going to build another component tomorrow and sort of see how that works. But this is the main portion that's being rendered on that page. And so what's going to happen is in the future is we're going to have these components. We're going to have some logic that says, hey, when X happens, go ahead and show this component. And that's really the power behind React is we can create these reusable components. If we have a form, if we've got a user experience, if we have something else like that, and we want to use it in multiple places, then that is what is the big power of component architecture versus like monolithic, meaning that you have to have a route and it sort of operates in a ton of different ways. These components are reusable, which is really, really, really important. You have some CSS here. This is just the base CSS. Before I deleted the app information, this was the CSS for that. Oh, can we mute? And then we also have our index CSS as well. That is just your basic index.html CSS. If you wanted to change like the font family, you could. If you had some base margin, you could. But you don't have to touch that. You won't ever have to touch that at all. Report web vitals. That's really just if you have vitals on how quickly things are coming in and how quickly things are loading. That's what that's doing there. These guys, you don't have to touch. I mean, these are just your logos, right? And then robots.txt is for like SEO stuff. So lots of browsers like Google, there's a whole world of SEO, search engine optimization, where Google will have crawlers, or companies like Lumar will have crawlers. They can crawl your website and see if your data and your links are working. And so you can sort of set some rules and parameters for your robots and your crawlers here. Again, not something you have to do, just more so telling you about it. You can create tests and you can set up tests. Again, we don't really need to do that, but you can if you wanted. But really the main thing that we're going to do, and the main thing that we're going to work on, is we're going to have our app.js, which, as you notice, is in ES5. We're going to write them in ES6. But then we actually are going to create a folder within this. Tomorrow, we'll create a folder called components, and we're going to write our first component. And then we'll see that we can actually add in a component in this app, and we'll call that, and then we'll be able to show that information, and we will be able to sort of make that information more readily available to us. Now, one last thing I want to note, I've got 2 minutes because I said I'll do 5 minutes over. So I'm going to do this. Somebody real quickly, somebody asked, what's the difference between NPX and NPM? I don't know that there's not a difference. NPX is part of NPM. I don't know, like I was saying, I don't know why they chose NPX create React app versus NPM, but that is a wonderful, wonderful question. The last thing to note is, and we'll maybe talk about this in depth tomorrow, and I'll show you this thing called Babel, but this looks like it is in HTML. This guy looks like it's in HTML. You see it says div and you have H1s and all of that stuff. This is actually not HTML. This is something called JSX. So what happens is there's a transpiler called Babel that we show this information and we say, cool, I want to create a div, and I want to, inside of that, I want to have an H1 that says hello world. Now, if I go to babel.com, I think it's .com. Nope. RIP. Cool. So what is kind of cool is this will allow us to try it out. So right now, what we can do is we can take this information and put it into Babel. And this is actually what's happening under the hood. The transpiler is taking our JSX code. It is writing it, and this is what is being understood on the React side. And what's nice about it is we don't have to do this, right? Remember how I said there was a little bit confusing, that first part of React? Well, you can see that's exactly what this is doing. You just don't ever have to do it. So you don't, there's not really a need to know it. And most people don't even know about Babel and what is happening here, but just know that, and we'll talk about that when we create our components tomorrow. These are not going to be HTML files. We're actually going to create them as JSX files. And that'll allow us to write HTML. And then all that happens is when this HTML or this code is being sent through index through index.js to this guy right here, it is transpiled and shown as JavaScript on our screen. But all we know is that it looks just like HTML. Are there any questions? Looking at the chat.
Totally. So we're using Babel, but there's also TypeScript, and because Babel is basically that's HTML. TypeScript is like JavaScript is like HTML. Is there a pros and cons thing, or is there use in conjunction with one another?
Yeah, so TypeScript's a little bit different. A lot of people really like TypeScript. TypeScript is more of a language that it gives you more control, but it still is actually it actually gets converted into JavaScript, which is kind of funny. TypeScript is, if you guys haven't heard of TypeScript, basically it is JavaScript with the rules, very similar to Java, where you have to declare what kind of variable or what type it is. So you can't just say let, you have to just declare like this is a string, this is an integer. But actually at the sort of granular level, that TypeScript gets broken down into JavaScript so that the DOM can understand that in the browser, because browser engines like V8, which is the Chrome engine that understands JavaScript, doesn't understand TypeScript. So TypeScript, the benefit is that it gets transpiled and broken down in an efficient way, and it actually reduces bugs, because if you declare something incorrectly, it's not going to be that big of an issue. Or sorry, if you declare something incorrectly, you'll know it before. You'll say, oh, I have an error. You said this is supposed to be a string and you're trying to multiply it. Instead of in JavaScript, if we do that, it just sort of is like the Wild West, right? And so your user will discover the error, you won't, but TypeScript sort of puts those guardrails. So that's what I would say with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions on just sort of what we're getting when we create React and we're creating a React app? Somebody asked what I would, oh yeah, so if you're downloading just the packages, you would just navigate into it and say npm I, and that's for install. And same thing with like, same thing with the Python, you would say pip install, and it would do the same thing. Cool. So the last thing I want to do is, let's go ahead and get out of this. Let's CD. Forgot where I was at. Cool. So for those that were here for office hour, is I showed you guys how to push something to GitHub. And so this has already been pushed to GitHub, and I will make sure that the link is on the class sheet tonight. But because I've already pushed it, I don't have to initialize a repository. I don't have to do anything like that. All I have to do is I have to git add, because I've added to these tools. And if you don't know how to initialize to the back end of the office hour, which again was recorded, the back end of that, I show how to initialize and create a repository. So you can walk through that. But all I have to do is git add. I'm going to add everything. I do git status. I'll see, what did I add? Cool, I added all this information, including my git ignore, thank goodness. Now I say git commit -m. -m stands for my message. So I'm going to say first created, first React app. Cool, I committed it. And then now all I have to say is git push. And if I were to pull up GitHub and my repositories, now I have created first React app because that is what was affected. I just did it. So now if I come in here, you can see lecture 2, I have my first React. And because of my git ignore, I don't have those node modules. I don't have the node modules. But it also created a README because whenever I ran that, actually ran the aspect, it created this README file. And so now in my GitHub, I also have access to this README to show some different things. Are there any questions? Sorry, I went 11 minutes over, friends. So sorry about that. We usually try to be very good with your time, but any other questions? Does this make sense? Just put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense. Great. I'm going to end the recording, but I will stay here in case anybody needs anything.